So the evolution of your brain has evolved to survive uncertainty. It's very scary to think about losing our identity. Instead of curiously allowing yourself to decode the game, and which is really just saying, I wonder what else might be true.
Makes sense.
So great morning, everybody. Great morning, world. Great morning, humans. This is your friend, Dr. JC Dornick. And welcome to another edition of the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. So we're going to get started here with this episode and give you back control of that prefrontal cortex, that place in your brain that you actually do control, and that place where you're thinking for yourself. It's really interesting when you ask somebody a question and they tilt their head and look up and start thinking, right? They say, what do I think about that? So that's what it feels like to reclaim control, because most of the time we're using our automatic knee-jerk reflex, our persuaded and conditioned and programmed minds to decide what we see and decide what we think about it. Remember, we don't control the things that are happening. We control how we respond to the things that are happening. So let's get this started. This is called The Glitch in Your Greatness: Why Your Brain Fears the Next Version of You. So this is going to be a lesson in how we wake up, arm ourselves with the weapon of awareness. So there's a version of you in your life. There's a version of you and there's a version of your life that you are not yet allowed to access. And I'm going to explain what that means. And that's not because you're incapable or because you're unlucky that you're not able to access this version of your life, but because you are still practicing a version of yourself that no longer exists. Now, just think about what that means. So this version of yourself that I'm saying no longer exists, the question is, well, why does it no longer exist? How could a version of my life no longer exist? Well, what I mean by that is it's because this old version of yourself that no longer applies is still something that we're holding on to, right? It's reached its expiration date. So if you think about yourself as something like a computer that has an operating system, a lot of us are holding on to an old operating system, which is concepts, beliefs, a perspective, and the way we look at things, the way we respond to things, that no longer applies to the version of yourself that you are today and your life today. So that's what's called the certainty trap. So this is a powerful concept to think about. Are you caught in the certainty trap? And if you are, it's not your fault, right? That's the glitch in your operating system. So we're going to look at the idea of acknowledging that there's potentially a glitch in our operating system. God, there's probably many. So you think you're stuck in life. Humans very often come to me and they explain and sell me on why they're stuck, because you need better habits, more discipline, and more strategy, right? So as a health transformation coach, I coach a metabolic reset program. So a lot of people come to me and they want to get healthy. They want, better nutrition and things like that. But they're very often explaining why they're stuck. So people think that they're stuck, and they think that they're stuck because they need to create better habits, more discipline, and more strategy. So that's why they come for help. But what you're actually stuck in is what's called a biological lag. So there's another term that's really cool. So your nervous system is running an ancient code, an ancient operating system in a 2026 version of you, in a 2026 world. So think about it for a second. Your brain has evolved to basically to survive uncertainty. So the evolution of your brain has evolved to survive uncertainty. That's a pretty powerful statement right there. So, but the modern world that we live in today doesn't reward certainty. It rewards cognitive liquidity. There's another term, cognitive liquidity. And that means the ability to change your mind fast. You ever notice how, whether it's somebody asking you a question or you at work or anything, everybody is just waiting and anticipating fast, rapid response. That rapid response is something that we feel compelled to create. And very often that's why we get caught up in the glitch without noticing it. So, and most people can't do that, right? And it's not because they're stupid. This is not a talent thing. It's not because they're stupid. It's because their identity, and this is that trap, their identity is fused in their interpretation of reality, not in reality itself. When we say that our identity is fused with our interpretation of reality, remember, we said the only thing that we can control is how we respond to things, to happenings. So there's this saying, what you see is what you get. And yes, that's true, but does it actually equate to what actually is? Or is what you see and what you get an interpretation of your reality? We're going to look at maybe getting a little bit closer to a truth that serves you better. So this is what some people call the architecture of reality. It's interesting to look at reality as an architecture. So your brain builds a structure, a story, out of the input that it's got from our five senses, or maybe six senses, our language. So we have a language, a way of interpreting things. And then of course there's the trauma. And then very often I speak in the book, especially in the chapter called The Program. And that's our MFTPSE. And that's our mothers, fathers, teachers, preachers, society, and the paying forward of evolution. So those are our programmers, and that includes society and what we're consuming every day. And it also includes the paying forward of evolution. A lot of the way we look at things and respond to things, therefore, are not necessarily the way we would choose to do it, but more the way we've been persuaded to. And then you move into that structure. So here's the trap. When we perceive things and we say, this is this, we move into that structure almost like it's a house. So I want to give you that visual. And in that house, we set up camp, right? We put all of our furniture around and we set up in that house, which is really just a learned structure. And we surround ourselves, therefore, and this is where cognitive bias comes in, we surround ourselves with the right people and the right elements that support this house or this belief system that we've built. So that's that certainty trap. The worst part about being certain about something, which is why I always remind myself by wearing this hat, which stands for haven't made up my mind yet, about anything. And I don't think I ever will, because I want to remain open and curious. That will help me decode the game and start becoming the dominant force and shot caller if I get to choose. But very often, if we're in that house camping out in that learned structure and we're protecting it with a certain group of people, our surroundings and elements, not only will you continuously bathe that certainty trap with all of those things, but you'll also find yourself blocking out everything else. We see this in religion. We see this in how we spend our time. We see this in politics. Okay. So it becomes our identity. And when something sets in, that's the house camping out concept. When something sets in as your identity, we're living in it, right? We're living in that space. And what we do is when we live in that space, you'll find yourself starting to defend that space. So we block out all things and people that don't live in that space. Why? Because if that house collapses, well, then who are you? It's very scary to think about losing our identity. So instead of curiously, there's a powerful word right there, instead of curiously allowing yourself to decode the game, and which is really just saying, I wonder what else might be true. So instead of curiously allowing yourself to decode the game of your life, you start protecting your position in it. Are you protecting your position in life? Because if you are, that's the glitch in the game that I'm referring to in this session. So you think you're playing the game. So I love to look at life as a game. You think you're playing the game, but in reality, if you step back and you allow yourself to, from an open and curious place, like we do here, if you allow yourself to look at it, you realize maybe the game is actually playing you. So we very often think we're playing the game, but then we find out that the game is playing us. And that's why I'm so passionate about recognizing phase one of the interface response system, that we live in a world that's doing the thinking for us. If you're involved in algorithms and social media and AI and the rat race and that rapid response that we all feel compelled to always have loaded, well, then the game might be playing us. Well, in fact, it is. So most people are stuck in this need to be right thing. There's a chapter in my book called Right versus Kind, which was a massive breakthrough for me. But the next level of consciousness to evolve from this need to be right thing is just to entertain the idea and become open to being righter. It's a lot of powerful things that happen when we put an ER at the end of something. Like, are we ever going to be healthy? I have an amazing guest coming on, Tal Ben Shahar, and he talks about becoming happier. He says that we never become happy, but we can become happier. There's a journey. So we're not talking about becoming morally superior or intellectually arrogant or anything like that, which very often people, protect themselves from doing that. But I'm just talking today about allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to become more open, adaptive, and curious. Probably the biggest power move a human being could ever do is not feel compelled to so quickly make up your mind. So that's why we have these hats. A lot of people are buying these hats now. If you go to my website, makesensebook.com, that's where we have all of our gear and the book stuff. So fun. And I'm just so blown away. I've got all these speaking engagements, and I'm really gaining the opportunity to share that work with people. I'm really excited about it. What we're talking about here is being positioned for growth. When we're open, curious, adaptive versus rigid, what we're doing is opening ourselves for growth. And because the truth, and this is a great, great quote from Lao Tzu, the truth is found in this amazing quote by Lao Tzu. And this is one of the pivot points that we move from jacuzzi to pivotal right here. So here's a quote from Lao Tzu, and he says this: "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." Now, I want you to just step into this space right now and recognize that our language and the way that we explain and interpret things is very often where the problem occurs, because that's when we start to dilute things further from the truth, and we start to use our programmed minds to identify what something is. And that's when we move into the house, right? So the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Let me explain what Lao Tzu means by this. He reminds us that the moment that we try to compress the ultimate truth, which is too much for us to handle, but the moment that we try to compress the ultimate truth into the limited human language, our language is vast. And it's amazing that we can communicate, and our five senses are amazing. The human body and brain is amazing, but extremely limited. We know that we only get a slice of what's happening in reality, and we make up the rest. So think about it. If we know that and we embrace that, as soon as we start using our language to compress the ultimate truth, what happens is we begin to shrink that truth. We move further away from the truth, and we shrink it into a size that fits our needs at that time. Now, if that serves you, great, success. But what happens to most people is when we start to dilute it and shrink it to that size that meets our needs, if it's a programmed need, right? A need that somebody else taught us, it moves the truth further and further from its original authentic state. So I love when people come to me and they say, "This is this," and that's that need to be right. And my answer is typically, because I have my own silly knee-jerk reflexes that I want to say all the time. I'm just like anybody else, but I insert that pause of, But sometimes I'll respond to somebody telling me something that is, and say something like, "Is that right?" Interesting. It's very interesting to not challenge somebody for what they said, but give them the space to think about it, because very often we don't think about it. So think about it. Language, identity, and experience are filters. This is a cool concept. And when your nervous system confuses your filter, so if you have your language, your identity, and your experience filtering reality, And when your nervous system that is in support of you, by the way, your nervous system is doing what it thinks you want it to do. And when it confuses that filter with the ultimate reality, well, that's where the friction starts. That's where the friction begins. Remember, this conversation is about empowering you to be the shot caller and dominant force of your reality, a reality bender, a reality designer. And I'm of the persuasion that we'll never, ever know the ultimate reality and truth. So if you're comfortable with your current version of it, that's fine. But if you're dissatisfied and you know that there's more, this is what's required. That's why the interface response system will be so helpful for so many people. So here's where it gets sticky. What happens is it also unveils the secret to decoding the game and leveling up in your consciousness. And that means accelerating towards your desired state. And what that means is that that moment where you realize that there's more and that you've been putting exclamation points behind things, and you also take note in phase one of the interface response system of that persuasive, uh, programmed, conditioned mind. It's very unsettling because you realize you haven't been living your life. You've been living your life as you've been taught and persuaded to. But it also, in that moment, and we know that hard things are usually a good thing, it unveils the actual place where leveling up your consciousness and accelerating yourself towards your desired state lives. So you have to go through that. So it begins with this. So this idea of leveling up, it begins with recognizing and acknowledging something I speak about all the time. I open up a lot of my talks like this, that everything that we want most in life seems to mysteriously and inconveniently have been placed on the other side of a big pile of shit. So think about it. I mean, all the things that you want in your life, the relationship that you want, sits on the other side of a hard conversation, right? I mean, if you're living comfortably right now, you're probably not moving towards anything that you really, really desire. Because if you are moving towards something that you desire, you're probably facing challenges and adversity. So this is this first observation that we have to make. The body that you want. I'm a transformation coach. I coach this metabolic reset program. I've gone through that process myself. So a lot of people want to change their physical health in their body, but that sits on the other side of diet and exercise, and also refraining from doing things that we're addicted to. How about the mission, the very calling and purpose, your mission, your destiny that you feel called to? Well, that sits on the other side of a host of speed bumps, tolls, rejections, letdowns, and setbacks. So the unconscious sleepwalker, I always say, welcome to the uprising of the sleepwalking masses, but the unconscious sleepwalker learns to resent the pile of shit. So that's what it means to become a victim of circumstance. So the unconscious person that's not playing in this sandbox right now and recognizing that there's a game going on, that there's a pile of shit sitting in between me and everything that I desire. But the unconscious person resents that pile of shit. They call it unfair. They refer to it as bad luck. I got a bad hand of cards in life. And they become victims of the unfortunate, what I call shit circumstance. So here's some good shift. What if the pile of shit isn't the obstacle? What if the pile is the playing field? So here's a reframe. What if the pile, the adversity, the setbacks, the letdowns, the challenges, the unfortunate, frustrating things that show up multiple times, yesterday and today and throughout our life, what if they're the playing field? Or what if they're actually opportunistically the portal and way to everything that we desire? Well, that's going to change the way you look at things. You know, Wayne Dyer always says, if we change the way we look at things, the things that we look at change. That's what it means. But if you resent the pile of shit and that's how you look at it, well, you're going to have to say, you're going to have to recall this conversation and be like a child that's playing a video game. So here's the way we gamify life. Children understand this. So for all of you that have been children before, that's all of you, or all of you that have kids right now growing up in this crazy world, children understand this. So watch a kid sometime playing a video game. I watch my daughter doing it all the time. They don't complain that the level is hard. They actually lean into the hard levels. They search, they flip every stone. They curiously look for tools, messages, and elixir potions. They're not attached to being right. So you see how we're retracing a lot of the things that we've said. They're not attached to being right about where the treasure is. It's actually a bummer once they get to the end of the game, right? They're more attached to completing the mission. So we talk a lot about this in our own world, that if you set your North Star and you have something that you desire, the likes of air, if your head is underwater, the how no longer makes any, it creates a problem. But you see this happening with children playing games. They're attached to completing the mission, and they love the idea that all of the challenges are what they need to conquer to get what they desire most. And they also understand that mistakes, setbacks, letdowns, and monsters, or the, as they call it, big boss fight that is at the end of every level, are part of the field of play and part of the game map. So when we say decoding the game, it's not just about decoding the game, but we have to learn how to play the game. If we look at life as a game, it's a lot of fun. Now, adults, most people watching this right now, we get embarrassed when we don't know something. I mean, if somebody asks you a question, you don't know it, and you get embarrassed, and it makes you recoil, or maybe makes you quit on something and try something else. That's not the way kids are playing games. So there's this thing called the cancel culture, and a cancel culture, and that means the idea that the culture is going to like cancel you out because you don't know something. So the cancel culture terrifies our ego. So we cling harder, and the harder that we cling, the more that the glitch that I'm talking about locks in. The harder we cling to that fear of the cancel culture, the deeper that the glitch locks in. So love and appreciate you all. This podcast episode will drop on Friday this week, the edited version. But I love and appreciate you, and it's been an honor and privilege to be here. So I'll see you next time, next Monday. Bye-bye now.
Makes sense.